I'm a 28-year-old woman who's managed to carve out a pretty decent life for myself. I work as a freelance graphic designer, rent a cozy apartment in the city, and spend most of my time working on passion projects or hanging out with friends. My life isn't glamorous, but it's mine, and I'm proud of what I've built. That said, there's one person in my family who has made it her mission to remind me that, according to her, I'm failing at everything. My aunt. My aunt is in her mid-50s and has somehow become the self-appointed matriarch of our family. She's not the oldest sibling, nor the most accomplished, but she's loud, opinionated, and knows how to wield guilt like a weapon. Everyone listens to her, even when they don't agree. It's like she has this unspoken power over family gatherings, and no one ever dares to call her out. She's married to a man who barely speaks during family events and has 2 grown kids who both moved far away and rarely visit. I've always wondered if their distance is a choice or just a coincidence. Either way, my aunt compensates by meddling in everyone else's lives. If there's a decision to be made, from what color you should paint your living room to where you should send your kids to school, she'll have an opinion. And if you don't take her advice, you'll never hear the end of it. I've always been her favorite target. Unlike my cousins, who followed more traditional paths, marriage, kids, suburban homes, I'm single, renting a 1-bedroom apartment, and focusing on my creative career. According to her, this makes me irresponsible, immature, and her favorite word, lost. Every family gathering is the same. She'll corner me and start with a passive-aggressive comment, like how cute it is that I'm still playing with art for a living. Then she'll launch into a lecture about how I need to grow up, settle down, and start thinking about my future. At first, I tried defending myself. I'd explain that I love my job, that owning a home isn't a priority for me, and that I'm perfectly happy being single. But nothing I said ever mattered. She'd just double down, saying things like, "You'll understand when you're older," or "I'm only saying this because I care." Over time, I learned to tune her out and let her ramble. It was easier than arguing. But last month, she pushed me too far. We were at a family barbecue, the kind where everyone pretends to enjoy each other's company while secretly hoping the food will run out so they can leave. I was sitting with my younger cousin, talking about a project I'd just finished, when my aunt swooped in. She loudly announced that my hobby wasn't going to pay the bills forever, and that I needed to let her help me figure my life out. She kept going, making a spectacle of herself, until everyone was watching. Then she said it. "Honestly, I could run your life better than you ever could." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for me to blow up or storm off. But instead, I did something I'd never done before. I smiled and said, "Okay." Her expression was priceless. She was expecting a fight, not agreement. For a moment, she looked almost flustered, but she recovered quickly. "Great," she said, grinning like she just won a prize. "We'll start next week." What she didn't know was that I wasn't actually giving in. I was tired of her acting like she knew everything, and I wanted to prove just how ridiculous her advice was. So I decided to take her offer literally. I was going to follow her guidance to the letter, no matter how absurd it was, and document everything along the way. If nothing else, it would be entertaining to watch her plan unravel. The following week, she sent me a typed schedule. Yes, a schedule. It included everything from updating my wardrobe professional yet feminine to creating an online dating profile. "I'll write it for you." She also wanted me to quit my freelancing career and start applying for real jobs at companies she thought were respectable. She even offered to set up interviews through her connections. It was like she'd mapped out my entire life without even asking what I wanted. I started following her plan immediately, making sure to record every interaction. She made me delete half my wardrobe because it wasn't age-appropriate and picked out clothes that made me look like I was heading to a country club. She insisted on approving every job application and even tried to sit in on a Zoom interview to coach me. It was invasive, exhausting, and honestly kind of hilarious. At family gatherings, everyone thought I'd lost my mind. They'd laugh and ask if I was serious about letting her take over my life. I just smiled and said, "She knows best, right?" My aunt ate it up, basking in the attention and telling anyone who would listen that I was finally on the right track. But as the weeks went on, her advice started causing real problems. My savings dwindled after I bought into an MLM scheme she swore was a surefire investment. I bombed multiple interviews because her tips were outdated and cringeworthy. And don't even get me started on the blind dates. Still, I stuck with it. The messier things got, the closer I came to proving my point. Little did she know, her reign was about to crumble. And I couldn't wait to watch it all unfold. Update 1. The first crack in my aunt's master plan came with the MLM scheme. She had been going on about this fantastic business opportunity that she was sure would change my life. It involved selling overpriced skincare products that no one asked for, but she insisted it was a surefire investment. She even had brochures and testimonials ready to back it up. Against my better judgment, but in line with my plan, I emptied a chunk of my savings into buying the starter kit. Boxes of serums and creams arrived at my doorstep a week later, and I was officially a business owner. The first problem became obvious when I tried to sell the products. No one wanted them. Friends politely declined, coworkers outright laughed. One even pulled up an article exposing the company as a pyramid scheme. My aunt's solution? A networking event she insisted I attend to pitch the product like a professional. She coached me on everything from my handshake to my elevator pitch. The event was a disaster. Picture this, a hotel ballroom filled with overly enthusiastic entrepreneurs and desperate pitches. I awkwardly tried to sell the skincare to strangers who avoided eye contact the moment they saw the logo. My aunt, meanwhile, was working the room like a seasoned salesperson, loudly proclaiming that I was her protege. When it was my turn to present, she shoved me onto the stage, where I fumbled through a script she had written. By the end, I was so flustered I forgot to mention the product's name. The audience barely clapped, and my aunt was furious. She blamed me for not believing in the vision. Next came the wardrobe makeover. My aunt decided that my casual style was holding me back professionally and socially. She dragged me to a department store, where she insisted I buy classy staples, pencil skirts, blazers, and heels I could barely walk in. I looked like I was cosplaying as a 1980s office worker. My friends couldn't stop laughing when they saw me. One coworker asked if I had a court date, but my aunt beamed with pride, convinced I was finally looking put together. The job hunt was no better. She made me quit my freelancing gigs to pursue a real career. She created a list of companies she admired, none of which aligned with my skills or interests. She even rewrote my resume, filling it with cliches like detail-oriented go-getter and synergistic team player. I bombed every interview. One recruiter actually paused halfway through to ask if someone else had written my application. Still, my aunt insisted I wasn't trying hard enough and doubled down on her advice. Then came the blind dates. She set me up with a parade of men she thought were husband material. One was her friend's son, who spent the entire dinner talking about his crypto investments. Another showed up late, reeked of cologne, and asked if I'd consider quitting my job to become a full-time homemaker. When I told her about the disaster, she dismissed my complaints, saying I was too picky and needed to lower my standards. At this point, the family started noticing. My cousins, who had always been wary of her, began joking about how I was now her project. But their laughter turned to frustration when she started meddling in their lives too. She told one cousin to stop breastfeeding because it was inconvenient and another to take out a loan for a home renovation she deemed necessary. For the first time, the family began to push back, emboldened by my very public meltdown. Things escalated when the MLM scheme officially tanked. I still had boxes of unsold products cluttering my apartment, and the small loan I had taken to fund it was due. My aunt, instead of admitting defeat, insisted I needed to try harder and suggested hosting skincare parties. I refused, which led to a screaming match during a family dinner. She accused me of sabotaging her efforts and making her look bad. Other relatives chimed in, telling her to back off. For the first time, the room wasn't on her side. The tension was palpable. My aunt, visibly flustered, tried to regain control by turning on the waterworks. She claimed she was only trying to help and that I had twisted her intentions. But the damage was done. My cousins started whispering about all the times her advice had ruined their plans, and my uncle, the quiet one, finally spoke up, saying she needed to let people live their own lives. The shift was undeniable. Her authority was cracking. Still, she refused to admit fault. She doubled down, telling anyone who would listen that I had failed because I didn't follow her plan properly. She was convinced that if I just put in more effort, everything would fall into place. Meanwhile, I kept following her advice to the letter, ensuring that every misstep could be traced back to her. By the end of it, I was financially drained, emotionally exhausted, and left with an apartment full of useless skincare products. But I wasn't done yet. My aunt's credibility was unraveling, and I had no intention of stopping until everyone saw her for who she really was. Update 2. After the MLM disaster and the wardrobe and job hunting fiascos, my aunt shifted gears. She started telling everyone in the family that my failures were my fault, that I hadn't followed her advice properly, and that I lacked the drive to make her plan work. It didn't matter that I had done everything exactly as she told me. In her mind, I was the problem, not her advice. The cracks in her influence deepened when my cousins started speaking up. One cousin reminded everyone about the time my aunt convinced them to invest in a revolutionary fitness machine that ended up collecting dust in their garage. Another brought up how she had pushed their sibling to take out a loan for a fixer-upper house, promising it was a gold mine. That house ended up costing more in repairs than it was worth, and they had to sell it at a loss. As more relatives shared their stories, the mood shifted. My aunt's once loyal supporters started to distance themselves. Even her husband, who had always stayed out of family drama, stopped defending her. At one point, he muttered that he was tired of hearing her expert advice ruin people's lives. Things came to a head at a family dinner. I decided it was time to lay my cards on the table. I brought a folder filled with screenshots of texts, emails, and notes documenting every interaction I'd had with my aunt since this ordeal began. I started with the MLM pitch, showing the family how she had pushed me to drain my savings and take out a loan. Then I moved on to the wardrobe overhaul, sharing photos of the professional outfits that had earned me ridicule at work. Finally, I showed them the job application she had written for me, complete with cringe-worthy buzzwords and phrases no one actually uses in real life. The room went silent. My aunt tried to interject, claiming I was twisting the story, but the evidence was undeniable. My cousins were furious. They started connecting the dots to their own experiences with her meddling. One even said it's like she enjoys playing puppet master with all of us. It didn't take long for word to spread. Within a week, stories about my aunt's antics were making the rounds in our extended family. Relatives who hadn't spoken to her in years chimed in with their own tales of unsolicited advice gone wrong. A distant cousin shared how my aunt had once tried to manage their wedding, turning it into such a stressful ordeal that they eloped instead. Social media became a battleground. Family group chats exploded with memes and jokes about my aunt's so-called expertise. Someone even created a bingo card of her great advice, with squares like buy a house you can't afford and invest in a failing business. My aunt saw these messages, of course, and tried to rally her supporters. She claimed she had only ever tried to help and accused everyone of ganging up on her. But her attempts to regain control only made things worse. A younger cousin, who had been about to invest in a risky business venture on her recommendation, privately messaged me to say, "You saved me from a huge mistake. Thank you for exposing her." That moment felt like a turning point. For once, the family wasn't just tolerating her behavior, they were actively questioning it. Eventually, my aunt started avoiding family gatherings altogether. She stopped responding in the group chats and even skipped her niece's birthday party, which was unheard of for someone who used to organize every family event. It seemed like the more people challenged her, the less she wanted to be around. Meanwhile, I began putting my life back together. I took on some freelance work to rebuild my finances and managed to return the unsold skincare products for a partial refund. A couple of cousins chipped in to help me cover the remaining loan payments, saying they felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. Their support meant a lot, and it showed me that, despite all the drama, my family wasn't as fractured as I'd thought. Out of the blue, I received an email from my aunt. It was a half-hearted apology, full of phrases like, "I'm sorry if you felt upset, and I only wanted what's best for you." She still couldn't admit she was wrong, but at least it was something. I responded with a short, polite message, making it clear that I didn't want her involved in my decisions moving forward. The final straw came at another family dinner, where someone casually mentioned that my aunt had tried to meddle in a neighbor's financial plans and had been shut down. The table erupted in laughter, with everyone taking turns impersonating her helpful advice. It was cathartic, like a collective release of years of frustration. For the first time, I felt truly vindicated. The family was finally seeing her for what she was, a meddling, self-serving control freak. They weren't just tolerating her anymore, they were setting boundaries. And as for me, I was done with her games. I had exposed the truth, and I wasn't looking back. Update 3. After the fallout from the family dinner and the growing number of relatives distancing themselves, my aunt went quiet. Too quiet. For a few months, she avoided family gatherings and stopped her usual overbearing texts and calls. It felt like the calm before the storm. Then, out of nowhere, an ornate invitation arrived in my mailbox. My aunt was throwing a lavish family event. The card was dripping with formality, complete with gold accents and a handwritten note. The tone of her message was unmistakably passive-aggressive. She called the event a celebration of family unity and specifically mentioned that my presence would mean so much after the recent misunderstandings. It was clear this wasn't just a party, it was her attempt to claw back the control she had lost. As expected, the family was divided. Some relatives argued that it was time to let bygones be bygones, saying, "She's family, after all." Others refused to attend, calling it a transparent power play. I decided to go, but not to support her. I wanted to see how she planned to spin this. The event was over the top. She had rented out an upscale venue, complete with catered food, live music, and floral arrangements that looked like they belonged at a wedding. It was the kind of display meant to scream, "I'm still in charge." My aunt flitted around the room, greeting guests and making sure everyone saw her playing the perfect host. As the evening went on, she gathered everyone into the main hall for a speech. She stood on a small stage, holding a microphone, and launched into a monologue about the importance of family values. Her tone was dramatic, and while she didn't call anyone out by name, her words were thinly veiled jabs. She talked about the dangers of straying from traditional paths and the importance of respecting elders. It was obvious she was trying to frame herself as the misunderstood victim. Not long after her speech, she pulled me aside into a quieter corner of the room. She started by lamenting how much stress this whole situation had caused her, then casually mentioned how a small gesture on my part could fix everything. She offered me a sum of money, more than enough to cover the debt I'd racked up thanks to her advice, on the condition that I publicly vouch for her in front of the family. She wanted me to tell everyone that I had misunderstood her intentions, and that her guidance had actually been helpful. I didn't even entertain the idea. I politely declined, walked away, and returned to the main event. She must have realized her bribe hadn't worked because, shortly after, the real fireworks began. One of my cousins, emboldened by the growing resistance to my aunt, decided they'd had enough. They stood up during the mingling and loudly confronted her in front of everyone. They brought up how her advice had led them to quit a stable job for a supposed dream opportunity that turned out to be a scam. My aunt tried to dismiss it, claiming it wasn't her fault the opportunity didn't pan out, but my cousin wouldn't let it go, demanding she take responsibility. The confrontation opened the floodgates. Other relatives began chiming in with their own stories, and it quickly became a public airing of grievances. My aunt attempted to deflect, saying she was being unfairly targeted and that her advice had always come from a place of love. She kept repeating that she only wanted what was best for everyone, but the room wasn't buying it anymore. That's when I decided to step in. I calmly pointed out several inconsistencies in her claims, using examples from the documentation I had shared earlier. I didn't raise my voice or accuse her of anything outright. I simply laid out the facts and let her words speak for themselves. The silence that followed was deafening. More family members started to side with me, agreeing that her behavior had caused more harm than good over the years. The unified front against her was undeniable. Even the relatives who had been hesitant to confront her began nodding along, and some offered their own stories of how her meddling had derailed their plans. My aunt, overwhelmed and visibly upset, tried one last time to turn the tide in her favor. She said she had always been the one to hold the family together and accused us of being ungrateful for her efforts. But no one was listening anymore. She left the event early, her exit hurried and unceremonious. In the days that followed, the family began openly discussing her behavior and its long-term impact. Many resolved to set firmer boundaries, promising not to let her interfere in their lives anymore. Meanwhile, I continued to rebuild my own life. Although I was still recovering financially, I felt a newfound sense of empowerment. The most surprising moment came when a distant relative, who had always been one of my aunt's staunchest supporters, reached out to me. They admitted they had been manipulated by her for years and thanked me for standing up to her. It was a small but meaningful victory. As the weeks went on, my aunt's isolation became apparent. She stopped hosting gatherings, withdrew from family chats, and even skipped an important anniversary party. It was clear that her influence had finally faded, and the family was moving forward without her dominance. For the first time in years, there was a sense of peace. The storm she had created was finally over, and I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction, knowing that we had all come out stronger on the other side. Update 4. Just when I thought the dust had finally settled, my aunt pulled a move I didn't see coming. A letter arrived in the mail, stamped with a law firm's logo. It was a cease and desist order, accusing me of defamation and demanding that I retract all the false accusations I had made against her. According to her, my documentation of her actions had damaged her reputation within the family, and she was prepared to sue if I didn't issue a public apology. I wasn't the only one who got the letter. Several relatives who had spoken out against her received similar threats, though mine was the most detailed. She claimed that my campaign of lies had caused her emotional distress and financial losses, though she didn't specify what those were. It was clear she was desperate to regain control, and this lawsuit was her last-ditch effort. When the family found out, the outrage was immediate. Relatives who had been on the fence about her behavior were appalled that she would take things this far. Group chats lit up with messages of support for me, with some relatives publicly declaring they would back me if she went through with the lawsuit. A few even joked about crowdfunding my legal fees, though thankfully it didn't come to that. I consulted a lawyer the next day, bringing all the documentation I had carefully compiled since the beginning of this ordeal. After reviewing everything, the lawyer assured me the case was frivolous and unlikely to hold up in court. Still, I needed to take it seriously. We drafted a response denying her claims and making it clear I wouldn't back down. Her demands were laughable. She wanted a public apology, a full retraction of my accusations, and a written statement acknowledging her positive influence on my life. She also demanded that I stop sharing the documentation I had collected, which was already circulating within the family. Naturally, I refused. Meanwhile, some relatives tried to mediate. My uncle, her husband, and a few older cousins approached her, urging her to drop the lawsuit and move on. They pointed out that the family was already fractured because of her actions and that escalating the situation further would only make things worse. But my aunt wasn't hearing it. She claimed the lawsuit was the only way to restore her good name and insisted she had been unfairly targeted. As news of the lawsuit spread, more relatives began coming forward with their own stories. One cousin shared how my aunt had pressured them into investing in a joint business venture, only to leave them with the financial fallout when it failed. Another revealed that she had manipulated their parents into co-signing a loan for her, which she never paid back. These revelations painted a much clearer picture of her pattern of behavior, and any remaining support she had quickly evaporated. My lawyer suggested we go on the offensive. We filed a counterclaim for emotional distress and financial losses caused by her interference in my life. The family rallied around me, with multiple relatives volunteering to testify on my behalf. Some even provided additional evidence of her past manipulations, including old emails and text messages that supported my case. The day of the hearing was surreal. I arrived at the courthouse to find a crowd of family members waiting to support me. My aunt showed up with her lawyer, looking visibly shaken. The courtroom was packed, with more relatives sitting on my side than I ever could have expected. It was clear she hadn't anticipated the level of solidarity against her. As the hearing progressed, her case began to unravel. The judge questioned the basis of her defamation claims, noting that most of the documentation I had shared was factual and supported by witnesses. My lawyer presented the counterclaim, detailing the financial and emotional toll her actions had taken on me. By the end of the session, her lawyer advised her to drop the case to avoid further embarrassment. Reluctantly, she agreed to withdraw the lawsuit, though she refused to issue a formal apology. The judge ruled in my favor on the counterclaim, awarding me a small financial settlement. I donated the money to a local charity, making it clear I wasn't interested in profiting from this mess. It was about sending a message that her behavior wouldn't be tolerated anymore. After the hearing, I addressed the family, thanking them for their support and encouraging everyone to set clear boundaries with her moving forward. I explicitly stated that I was done with her interference and hoped the family could finally move on without her dominance. In the weeks that followed, my aunt went completely silent. She stopped attending family events, withdrew from group chats, and seemed to retreat from the family entirely. Meanwhile, the atmosphere within the family shifted. Without her influence, relationships began to improve, and there was a sense of relief that we no longer had to tiptoe around her. Looking back, the lawsuit was the final nail in the coffin of her reign over the family. It was an exhausting ordeal, but in the end, it brought us closer together. For the first time in years, the family felt united, not under her control, but in spite of it. Update 5. After the lawsuit debacle, my aunt's reputation within the family was beyond repair. The once commanding matriarch now found herself largely ignored. Invitations to family events dried up, her messages in group chats were met with silence, and even her closest allies in the family began keeping her at arm's length. It was as if everyone had collectively decided that life was better without her constant interference. Without my aunt's domineering presence, the family's dynamic shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Communication improved. People started resolving conflicts without the usual layer of manipulation she used to stir the pot. Family gatherings became less tense, and decision-making felt more collaborative. For the first time in years, it felt like we were functioning as a unit rather than a chessboard for her games. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. With the lawsuit behind me, I threw myself into finding stable work. After a few months of searching, I landed a job with a creative agency that not only paid well but also allowed me to work on projects I genuinely enjoyed. My finances, which had been in tatters thanks to the failed MLM scheme, slowly began to recover. I even managed to pay off the remainder of the loan I had taken out, finally closing that chapter of my life. Speaking of the MLM, it didn't last much longer after my involvement ended. The company faced mounting legal troubles of its own, and within a year, it officially shut down. I made it a point to warn others about falling into similar traps, sharing my experience on social media and within local creative communities. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and it felt good to turn something negative into a cautionary tale that might help others. My aunt, however, wasn't ready to fade into obscurity quietly. Unable to control her narrative within the family, she turned to outsiders. She began telling friends and acquaintances that she was the victim of a family-wide smear campaign. She painted herself as the misunderstood matriarch who only wanted the best for her relatives, only to be betrayed. But her attempts to gain sympathy didn't go far. Most people had either heard the truth or found her stories too far-fetched to believe. In her absence, one of my younger cousins stepped up as an unofficial organizer for family events. Inspired by everything that had happened, they made it their mission to foster a healthier, more inclusive dynamic. They started organizing game nights, potlucks, and casual get-togethers that felt worlds away from the tense, over-orchestrated gatherings of the past. It was refreshing, and it brought us closer as a family. Despite her isolation, my aunt wasn't done trying to worm her way back into my life. Out of nowhere, she sent me a message claiming she had changed and wanted to start fresh. She apologized for any misunderstandings and suggested we meet to talk things over. I wasn't interested. Her refusal to take real accountability during the lawsuit had been the final straw for me, and I had no intention of letting her back into my life. I politely declined and blocked her number. The turning point for the family came during a major celebration, our grandparents' wedding anniversary. It was the first big gathering since the lawsuit, and it felt like a fresh start. At the event, a few relatives pulled me aside to thank me for standing up to my aunt. One of them even gave a short toast in my honor, saying my actions had brought long overdue change to the family. It was an unexpected but heartwarming moment. We also used the occasion to set some ground rules. As a family, we collectively agreed to enforce boundaries with my aunt. If she tried to interfere in anyone's life again, we would shut it down immediately. The mood in the room was optimistic. For the first time in years, it felt like we were all on the same page. Rumors began circulating that my aunt had started seeking help for her controlling behavior. Some said she was attending therapy, though she never admitted it publicly. It was hard to tell whether she was genuinely trying to change or simply trying to salvage what little reputation she had left. Either way, it didn't matter much to me. I had moved on. With the weight of her influence lifted, I found myself inspired to start a new creative project. Drawing from everything I'd been through, I began working on a series of digital illustrations about personal growth and resilience. The project gained traction online, and I was touched when several family members shared it on their social media, expressing pride in my work. It felt like a full circle moment, turning the chaos she caused into something positive. But just when I thought the story was over, there was one last twist. At an unrelated social event, a mutual acquaintance mentioned overhearing my aunt spreading rumors about the family. Apparently, she claimed we had all conspired to ruin her life, and that the lawsuit had been a setup. It was laughable and sad, but it confirmed what I already knew: she hadn't truly changed. Still, it didn't bother me the way it once would have. She no longer had power over me or the family. We had grown stronger, more united, and more resilient in the aftermath of her meddling. For the first time, I felt a sense of closure. I had done everything I could to expose the truth, and now it was up to her to face the consequences of her actions. As I look ahead, I'm optimistic. The family is in a better place, and so am I. While the scars from her influence may never fully fade, they serve as a reminder of how far we've come and how much better things can be when we stand together.